and we'll go from there. Everything is muted in my office, hopefully. Oh, turn off that. All right, so we are live. Wonderful. Well, first, I want to say hello and welcome to the Common Mission Project Hacking for Advisory Board live stream, our first one. We're bringing our community of thought leaders to a very important topic of beneficiary discovery. And we'll get into our introductions real quick. We'll have some people that are coming in and going out depending on availability. Anybody who's an educator who's watching this or will watch this, they'll know that sometimes we've got class and things that get in the way. It's difficult to get people from all over the country here in the States to find a time. But just want to say thanks to the folks who are joining, who are watching us, and we'll do a couple of brief introductions and then go from there. So first, I am Jim Santa. I'm the Director of Curriculum at Common Mission Project. I'm also adjunct teaching faculty at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where I teach all of the Hacking 4 programs that the Common Mission Project sponsors. Rodrigo, anybody who listens to our podcast is familiar with Rodrigo, but welcome, Rodrigo.
Yeah, we can put a face now to the voice, right? So the,
Right.
the funky accent that you're used to hearing when you're listening to the podcast. My name is Rodrigo Nieto. I am a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School. I'm also an academic advisor for the Common Mission Project. And we've been working on this innovation field now for 15 years, trying to get bureaucracies from the inside to gain velocity in their pace of change and transformation. And we're super excited. And we're very, very, very lucky today to have Bernie with us. So, Bernie, if you want to introduce yourself, and it's a pleasure having you here, man.
Thanks, guys. Another funky accent. I'm Bernie Klausner. I'm a political science professor at James Madison University in Virginia. And I've been teaching hacking for defense and hacking for diplomacy since 2017 here at the JMU X Labs. And again, as Rodrigo said, I've very much enjoyed sort of merging those two worlds of innovation and entrepreneurship with national security and defense. It's a very, very important sort of high impact learning experience for our students, and it has equally beneficial impact on the defense and intelligence diplomatic community.
No, absolutely. And I think so. This is going to be the first of many sessions, right? And our academic advisory board is bringing together thought leaders from across academia, from industry, in a few other places. And speaking of thought leaders, Magda has joined us from Texas A&M. Magda, we were just going through our introductions, and like great opportunity for you to jump in and let us know, let the audience know who you are.
Oh, sure. Hello, everybody. Magda Lagudas from Texas A&M University. My role at the school is, I've been here for about 30 years at various roles. Right now, I'm executive director for industry partnership, and I am co-teaching also hacking for defense. I'm the PI for our iCore site and some role on the iCore hub that we just got in Southwest.
Oh,
And I
that's
am so
tremendous.
glad to be here.
Thank you, Magda. So yeah, so this is a great group here. Some of the representatives from our academic advisory board. But today, what we're focusing on really is beneficiary discovery. And we've got a number of topics, and we're not going to touch on everything in this session. There'll be a follow on. There'll be other media and things that we put together for all of this. But something that one of the things that makes hacking for is this idea of getting out of the classroom, right? So one of the things that we see, and Bernie, I'm going to kick over to you first on this, but we often see students struggling with not only how to conduct successful beneficiary discovery, but how to use tools like the mission model canvas, the value proposition canvas as part of those interviews. So our goal here is to kind of prepare students not only for discovery, but also how to apply that discovery in a real way, but not necessarily turn them into qualitative research experts. So this is one of the things that, in academia, I know we're all sitting here, we know you've got the qualitative literature that is its thing, that's very important from a robustness perspective, but Hacking 4 is in a lot of ways a practitioner's course. It's the way of getting students out of the classroom to experience a lot of these different opportunities. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on, and Bernie, going to you first on this, is thinking about how we're preparing our students to conduct these and how we're using the VPC. And I know you've got some thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear what you're doing and what recommendations you have, not only for our faculty who are watching, but our students, our innovators, our entrepreneurs, our intrapreneurs. What's your feedback really on this preparation process of getting them not only to get out of the building, but to using some of these tools?
Sure. I think sort of the unique aspect at JMU is that it's a mainly undergrad university, and hacking is being taught at the undergrad level. And we, over the years, we bring in different faculty from different disciplines and their students. So we would have an engineering professor and their students, a computer science professor and students, political science and students, communication students, nursing, biology. So over the years, we have, assembled a good teaching team with the corresponding student team. So we have sort of interdisciplinary, as we are breathing it, right? This is our lifeblood, and we are seeing how we can leverage that for hacking. But again, they're all undergrads, right? So they're all undergrads, and there's a huge amount of trepidation and anxiety about having that first interview with somebody who might even be a general or ambassador. So again, this is a huge culture shock to a lot of students.
Sure.
Not only the interview itself, but also cold calling, making the first contact. So there has to be we have a particular session on preparing students for making those interviews, for even writing an email. The whole etiquette. We see there's sort of a generational gap between how we would email.
That's so interesting. So let me get there, Bernie. So how do you teach that? So because this is the part of executive skills that I think it's underrated on the value of the discovery process as a learning experience, is that you're actually teaching we're teaching our students to do stuff that you would assume they would know, and they don't, right? So how do you go through that one, Bernie? And I'll send that one to Magda too.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's a generational thing, right? And perhaps somewhat cultural. I'm not American, so I think there might be differences between different Europe and the US, perhaps, being Mexico and the US and Europe. The way they talk to peers should not be applied to the way they address somebody for this particular class, or even like any sort of stepping into a professional network. So we have them write an email in class, tell us how you would write that first emails, and then put it up on the screen, and we discuss it, and we provide feedback of what they shouldn't do or what in fact was really good. So
that's a great idea.
It's not always that they get it wrong completely, right? So it's not some exercise in shaming, but exercise in learning. And sometimes they're rather oblivious to it, and sometimes we learn too, because the way they approach something is a lot more organic and a lot more a lot better than that sort of awkward phrasing we may have used in academia. So they're a lot more relaxed too at some point at times. So I think that's important, so that they know. And we also try to take away some of that fear, right? Again, these are students, undergrads, juniors, seniors, talking to high-level folks in the federal government. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what they can say, what they shouldn't say. So we prep them. We prep them. Who are you interviewing? What's their title? What's their affiliation? How did you find this person? And most importantly, what is you trying to gain from this interview? Right. This is a lot of time you're using for that. Using your time, their time. There's maybe 2 or 3 of you. What are you trying to get out? Make it count. Right. What's the flesh you wanted to get out? We tell them, introduce yourself. Sorry. Yes.
It's so interesting what you just said, because it's especially when you're teaching this as an undergrad program, right? So you're telling that this might be the ranking member of the sponsoring a problem, and that can be daunting. I mean, I remember myself being at the PhD level, forget about undergrad, and the first time that you start interacting with people with 1 or 2 stars on the shoulder, it's a scary moment in your life. It's also a very gratifying one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think what I found over the last 5 years is, from the feedback I'm hearing from students, that people in the military, in the State Department, of course, all for the most very courteous in the way they talk to their peers and other people, but everybody likes to sort of walk down memory lane, right? The college years. So again, there's always this window out. Yes, and everybody goes on about nostalgia about the college. So this is really a good way in for them, that they're feeling at ease, and that's what I found in the last 5 years. And again, I'm highlighting that because we are dealing with undergrads. They had some sort of qualitative research, courses in their respective fields, but they're not graduate students, they're not PhD students, right? So an interview, requires a lot of qualitative research skills, which they don't have yet. So that's why for us, it's important to prep them only for that particular interview and sort of the do's and don'ts of it.
No, absolutely.
Magda, how do you
Magda,
do it?
Yeah,
exactly.
No, I like that. So we go through, we do the training, we talk about what kind of questions, how you approach people. totally agree, undergraduate versus graduate. This is the first time we have the majority of them being graduate students. We will see at the end of the semester the quality of the outputs, but so far, what we have seen definitely a difference on the type of questions they are asking. I like your example. I'm going to use it, and I'm going to use it for the I-Course site also. We have a training this Friday for about 15 teams, most of them graduate students. So I'm going to have them write that first email. I noticed with the undergraduates, this is a school in the South. We're not very formal. And sometimes they skip all the titles. And my suggestion to them is it is much safer to use a title and let the person tell you that they
Tell
want
you.
you to call him Jack or
Right.
whatever, but
Right.
use the proper. I liked what Jeff has in his manuscript. I don't know if you had the chance to look at it. At the very end, he has some sample emails. And I like that. He has several of them. How do you approach this? And what does this mean? What is this part of the email and why you're using it? So we definitely share that with our class.
That's interesting, and it's I think talking about like how to teach people. It's one of those things, and I realized this early on teaching the hacking for my probably my first semester is that the qualitative learning and things that you think that you people just know how to do, they don't. And we have this ability to kind of say, oh yeah, we learn how to do this over 5, 6, 10 years in our academic or professional careers, and it's interesting that yeah, it took that many years. If you put yourself back, you were mentioning like the nostalgia there. So one of the things we do at RIT, for example, is I do an interview lab. And it's the second week of class, and I bring in qualitative research experts, HCI experts, individuals who do this for a living, who elicit reactions and responses and information from beneficiaries for their job. And getting the students engaged to do a number of different activities and getting in, the ideas of, the how do you address somebody. So Magda, you brought up the point, if you're talking to, if a students have never talked to a soldier before, do you say, Jim, or do you say, do you say captain or colonel or sergeant, whatever, knowing the appropriate ways of the proper nouns and everything else. These are all these little things that live in these worlds that students aren't familiar with and how to do this. So being able to, and remove bias and understand that validation and invalidation is equally as important in the classroom from a learning perspective, and being able to apply how you elicit information seems to me to be this hallmark of how can they get to this discovery. And Rodrigo, we've talked a lot about discovery in our podcast sessions and everything else, but I'd be curious from your perspective as well, is what have you been doing? How are you seeing this ecosystem, and how do you encourage your students to not only get out of the classroom but have the tools and resources to do so successfully?
Yeah, one of the things that it fascinates me is the idea of the concept of the interview, right? And because that's a very broad topic that can mean many things depending of the kind of project that we're spearheading, depending on that, the design of the experience is very different, right? You are getting especially when you already have an MVP, when you have a minimum viable product that you can present. What you're looking for is to elicit not necessarily the information about the quality of the product, that's research and development, but about the business plan, right? You're trying to validate the business plan. And that sometimes means interviews that are not necessarily interviews. They're experiential activities, at least not in the traditional sense that people understand. They're experiential activities that students have to craft. So when they get to the person that they're going to be interviewing, they can elicit not just the vocabulary or conversation, but actually the interactions with whatever they're trying to test. And this is, by the way, valid for a public policy, right? There are ways in which you can beta test a public policy. So I've been making a point, and I use testing business ideas. I think you already recommended it once in the podcast, of showcasing catalogs of different ways in which you can approach the interview process, where one of them is to have a conversation, but this is not the only one. And this means, to Bernie point and Magda too, that you cannot come and just wing it, right? That you really need to design the experience. Right?
Right.
It's not enough just to come with 3 questions that you thought that while you were getting there and ask them, right? It has to be a lot of prepping. It has to be done for this experience to be successful.
Yeah.
Rodrigo, I could not agree more. And one of the things that I would like to see more on our side doing is when we present the problem to the students, there is a sequence of 3 articles or 2 papers or some documentation that they will be required to read and become knowledgeable. Because I think the first approach they have is I'm going to go and learn about it. And that's not the goal. The
Mhm.
goal is not to use the interview time to learn. Your goal is to use the time to validate, invalidate what you
Yes.
think is happening. But we are dealing with engineering students, all of our students engineering. So it is a little bit harder because they immediately have a solution. And they want to say, would this work? And we say, no, 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 stop this, stop this. We
Right,
cannot do
right.
it. Maybe
Yeah.
for when you have students from communications and business, they have had some of this experience, and
Mhm.
maybe they function a little bit, they are more comfortable. But I want to make 2 points, James, if
Yes,
I
yes.
can. One
Please.
is the way that we present this is, at least the way when I talk about this experience is, engineers have been hired in the past to solve problems. Now we need them to define the problems,
Yes.
not only to solve them, because all the computers and all the algorithms and the AIs will take all those rules and use them. So this is what you're doing is essential. The other thing, and I heard it recently from a consulting company, we want these skills because in big consulting companies, we bring engineers and we want them to have an active role in that conversation when we are trying to define the project. And that's what a better way to do that other than when you're trying to understand the problem from the person through the customer discovery. And I'll stop there.
No, that's a great point. And David, welcome. So we've kicked
This
this
is
off.
this is the
So it's
beauty
great.
of a live event. We get people getting in as we speak. David, nice seeing you. And Magda, I couldn't agree more with you. We were talking, David, for our listeners about the importance of learning how to define the problem, James. This is something you and I have discussed a lot.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to pivot back to Bernie real quick on is this idea of the preparing undergraduates for the interview experience, but also the value proposition canvas. And Rodrigo, again, this is something that we've talked about frequently, is about these particular canvases, and the value proposition canvas really being this microcosm of the right side of the mission model canvas, business model canvas, however you want to look at it. And Bernie, just I know we've got limited time here with you, but I just want to, thinking about, so we have these ideas of getting students prepared, even like the generational gap, the experiential learning gap that we see in higher education. There's been 3 articles this week published on from the Chronicle, Inside Higher Ed. Pete Newell published one on Defense One about the way that the things are changing and what students are expecting, and this value proposition canvas and these canvases kind of being these tools for learning, getting out of the classroom. But I'd really like your feedback, before you have to depart, on the value proposition canvas and that tool being used in conjunction with that process. Because I think that's something that students and even faculty who perhaps are new to this ecosystem don't always understand, that relationship between getting out of the classroom and using these canvases in a very constructive way.
So for somebody who has very little experience with qualitative research and interviewing, the value proposition canvas really is an incredibly important framework to make an interview work, right? Because it's an exercise in gaining empathy and deep listening. And these are things that are difficult. They're difficult for us, not just professionally, but also in personal lives, right? So
Absolutely.
you're having that empathy. And again, what Magda said, more than often than not, our students also in week 3, they think, oh, it's an app, you build an app and that's it. So for them, problem discovery in the first period is key, because they think they have an idea and they're tied to that, but they really don't know what the problem is. And I
Right.
should say that quite often for students to actually redefine and present to their problem sponsor, your problem actually is this, rather than what you were thinking, that is important. So redefining problem, that quite often the problem thought this was a software problem. In fact, it's a communication problem between these 2 departments, and they redefined, and it was an important part of the MVP. So problem discovery is key, not just for you to gain empathy and a good understanding, but it could actually lead to redefining the problem for the problem sponsor, and could be a huge part of the solution.
That's
The
such an
VPC is
interesting thing.
key. The VPC
Yeah.
is key for that they have that tool, because it's so important for students to realize that they need to gain the empathy and the true understanding of what it is, what are the pain points, and what it is they're trying to we're not looking at the MVP yet. We're just looking at the early phase of problem discovery.
Right.
VPC is equally important there. That is further down when you actually have a great idea. end of product.
Connecting your idea, Bernie, to what Magda said, I have a good friend. He's a former PM for DARPA, and he famously told me that the first thing that he does with his teams is to take away their keyboards so they don't write a single line of code, right? So to try to completely avoid that first, because once you start writing code, that settles, right, and that becomes. So we were talking about solutioneering, and that starts to create commitment. So.
I'm attached.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So you have a dependency path at that point. And one thing that I think Hacking 4 does really well is that it humbles people. And if we do it well, to get away from that dependency path. Am I willing to throw away my original hunch or idea to the trash can once validated learning showed me that it's not the way to go?
Yeah.
No, I think that's interesting. So, David, if I'm not sure if we're catching your audio, but would love to jump into that as well. But Bernie, you mentioned something very interesting about that idea of taking away the keyboards, and Rodrigo talking about taking away this and getting on this you're setting yourself on this path. And the one comment I give every semester to my students, and I in Magda like you, I usually have engineering students, but computing security engineers. And they always come to me every class, or I learned over the course of a couple of semesters, is I say, listen, if the problem was as easy, or the solution, excuse me, was as easy as putting Linux code on a Raspberry Pi and deploying it to the units, don't you think the very smart people in the government would have done this? And you get these very smart students who look at you like, wait a second, because they're so ingrained in them to solution when we haven't even defined that problem yet. And I think this is such this interesting paradigm is like, I love the idea. Get away from your computers, get away from the screen. Let's figure out like, what are you actually trying to talk to? And Bernie, I couldn't agree more that it's so frequent when you get presented with a technology problem, and the technology might be 5 steps down the road because we have policy or adoption or whatever. There's a technical maturity issue, not issue, but there's just this lack of technical maturity in an organization that they're not ready to do something, or just a complete lack of awareness, perhaps. So it's an interesting paradigm there that you bring up that I've experienced in every single one of my classes, regardless of the problems.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that microphone working now?
Yeah. Hey,
We
hey,
can
David.
hear you now.
So
Well, it didn't want to let me change it because of the recording. So I had to log out and log back in. But yeah, I just wanted to maybe just add one quick point on what you were talking about with VPC and really, I think one of the most important things that I learned from the very beginning when going through the lean methodology process was the fact that you're going to get a problem assigned to you, given to you, but you can't trust what that problem reads as, right? You can't trust that, the sponsor, the client, whoever is giving this to you is giving you really what the true problem is. It might be a problem to them, but it might not be a problem to the greater good, right?
Absolutely.
So really the VPC is based on figuring out whether this problem can be validated or invalidated, right? You do you go through and you ask all the right questions, you try to figure out the pains and gains, you figure out what everybody's working on, and then you do some hypothesis testing based on what you think maybe a potential solution could be or whatever that might be, and then you come back and you say, hey, is everything that we see that's synergistic across all of these interviews we've done, through these value proposition canvases, do we have synergies that align, and does this align with the original problem statement, or do we have a new problem that we need to look at instead? Right?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that. And, Magda, I'd be curious. I mean, we've talked extensively about some of these problems, whether these things pivot, but I would imagine that your experiences there really are very similar to David and to Bernie. I mean, I think this is all something we've experienced. I'd love to hear what your feedback is on what David was just talking about.
Is on the point of students wanting to solve and focus on certain things. And I like the word that Rodrigo used, the dependency path. I love that. Can I use that?
Of course.
I think, yeah. So what I see is because we have engineering students, it's natural to gravitate to an area where they can use their skills. It is uncomfortable to say, I'm going to learn all those things, the pains, the gains. Where did we teach them about what is a pain and a gain in engineering? So it is natural for them to say, so we have, like everybody else, we're doing presentations every week. And on Tuesday, everybody had some kind of an MVP. One team has not been able to get really a good conversation with the sponsor, but they have an idea how they want to solve it. And it makes it challenging for the faculty who are involved. But I really think, from my point of view, it is a great educational experience for engineering students, especially the students now that are graduate students, who feel like, I know how to do this. And we tell them, put the brake on. Put the brake on. We want you to do it. Because we want you, like Dave said, we want you to figure out what is the real problem, not what one person thinks the problem is.
Yeah, and that I think that's a really interesting point. And this is where it goes back to the idea that the qualitative literature talks about data saturation and thematic bucketing, all these different things. We're all familiar with this. But the idea of the Hacking 4 class being very practitioner based, right? So if we follow like an I-Core model in a lot of ways, how do you figure out what the market wants? Not what you think is best, what the market wants. And that involves getting out of the classroom and talking to lots of different people within the beneficiary ecosystem. One of the tools that I use in there is really that mission achievement canvas. That any of my students who are listening or anybody here, I'm sure, has some familiar with this. But just this triangle of top to bottom about these activities that happen at the tactical, strategic, and the operational and strategic level. And what's interesting is so my students this was their first week of presenting that particular canvas. And I know not every faculty uses it. But my first question I ask them when they get to them, because they're always a mess, and it's the learning experience. I'm like, was this deceptively difficult for you? And you just see everybody, a weight come off their shoulders. Like, I can't believe what you presented visually, being what I thought was easy, I got it completely wrong, and I wasn't thinking about it this way, or regardless of what it looks like. And I think that to me highlights why this process that we use, this design thinking kind of process, where all these individual pieces you see working together over time, becomes that much more impactful, right? Because it's like, I give an example, like a mechanical watch. You can take the gear out, and somebody who knows what they're doing will say, oh yeah, that does this and that. But for the most part, most people would just have to see all those pieces working together and say, oh, that's the thing that keeps the time, working better or whatever. And it's these tools, going back to the value proposition canvas, the empathetic learning, empathetic teaching, that we use. And this is a way of kind of being able to understand, you can't go into solutioneering, because, Magda, to your point, well, what problem are we solving for? If one person says it's an issue, is it really an issue? And it seems like such an impactful way of being able to look at this. So Bernie, I see that you've got something here. I'd love to hear from you.
I think that's exactly what you and Magda said. Particularly dealing with the undergrad pool is, if they're talking to somebody in a high-ranking position and that person speaks with authority, they think that's it, right? It could be that that's the MVP and that's the solution, or it could be the opinion. So again, we're looking at a critical mass of people that are getting the feedback. Is this evidence-based engineering you're doing, or is it the opinion of one person who speaks with authority and who has the authority? And it can be both. I mean, we had one team. It was a problem by NATO on optimizing troop mobilization in Europe, and that person said it's not a logistics problem; it's a decision-forcing problem. We're not making decisions. So that the whole pivot was to creating a decision-forcing tool for officers in NATO. Right? This was opinion of one person who spoke with authority. And in that case, it actually was the right direction, right? It changed the entire problem. It redefined the problem, and it created a brand new MVP. So again, it's possible. But I think for undergrads in particular, what I'm seeing, again, speaking of my experiences, that they can get carried away with one interview because that person spoke, with a lot of authority at the time. And I have
one thing that I would add, what you're saying.
Bernie, thank you so much.
Sorry,
yes, and then David, please.
Sure.
I'm staying.
Just quickly, because you're talking about undergrads, but I think we could spend a whole segment talking about different types of students, and really the adaptability of what they're trying to do in this class is different between undergrads, grads. I've had everybody from undergraduate all the way to people that have been in their industry for 30 years. Do this course, and the way that they adapt and adjust to lean methodology is quite different. What you're saying there is so accurate, right? Undergrads tend to really excel when a problem is given to them and they can create a solution, right? Without going through the lean methodology process of trying to make sure that that's the right problem to look at. But you look at those that have a lot of experience in the industry that have had to come up with the problem and solution. Those tend to really I would say, align to this methodology very well and very easily. So really, it's about how we can better adapt what we are teaching across the board and understanding, how experience really cultivates that a little bit.
Hey, David, just
Not for
based
the
on
job
your
to you guys.
comment,
Thank you.
Bernie,
Bernie.
thank you.
I'm Magda. Bye.
Bye, Bernie.
I want to take what you said, and you almost opened the door to what I wanted to talk about later, but I'll do it
Let's
now
do
and
it
ask
now.
Magda
Yeah.
about it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So, what is a successful hacking for class? Will look differently depending on who you are and your. But it is important to at least create some common denominator of what a successful discovery process would look like, right? So, and it'll be different for us. So, in your opinion, right, as experts in the field who have been doing this for a while, Magda, I'll ask you first, but then I'll come back to you, Dave. What is the one thing or two things that you think the discovery process should have that if it doesn't, it wouldn't be anymore a hacking for class? That something went so bad that it's not anymore what we want. What is it the thing that you say? Okay, we can have variability here, but this has to be there. What is that?
What has to be there? I
Yeah.
think what we're talking about with, problem discovery and really understanding what everybody that's involved with that problem, how they deal with this, right? I mean, if you don't have the tools, if you don't have a way to go across the bigger picture, you're not going to be successful. You're going to create something, but what is that something, right? It's going to be something for maybe one or two people, or is it going to be for 1,000 people, right? You learn that through this process. That is the whole, I think, point. One thing that's funny to note, I'll make mention of, is in a past class, I had a team that was a mix of undergrad and graduate students, and one of the points of feedback that I got from an undergraduate student was that they felt so timid, and they weren't really sure how to work with the graduate student. They felt like they didn't have enough skills or whatever it might have been. I wasn't really sure, but we had a conversation, and really it was about just becoming more comfortable with this process. That was the big part of it, and creating that comfort level with the process. So if you create that comfort level, they feel better with it. They start to learn. They start to adapt. They want to adopt, and then they're like, "There's no other way we could have done this without this." Right?
Yeah.
Magda?
Well, I'm going to follow. I think Dave covered most of the things I wanted to say, but I will make two comments. One is, when it's undergraduate students, I usually tell them, think about this class being a precursor to your capstone project. In your capstone project, they give you a problem, they give you the design requirements. Here, we don't have a problem. We're trying to define it. And by the way, during your customer discovery, you should be capturing design requirements. What would make this an acceptable solution? So I put that in the student. To Rodrigo's question on what is the one thing, to me, it is understanding that the perfect technical solution, it's not the goal. The goal is the solution that, well, use the word, create value, money, whatever it is, but it satisfies most of the stakeholders. And this is not something we usually talk in these classes, in engineering classes, so it is a good way for them to learn that. So what I see in the students, I see how much learning has come during the semester. So I have an example of a student who came in as a freshman, and I said, no, you should not take this class because you need to have a good GPA at the end of your first semester to get into the major you want. This is how engineering students come here. He begged me, he got into the class. I have to tell you, there were juniors and seniors, but he was the lead. And it was a project by MDA, something about radiation in space. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I shy away from those things because it's so complicated. But what he learned out of that, all the different issues and agencies that are associated and the tools that are involved to do space radiation, and he loved that. So he went to X-Force. Now he wants to have a team that is focused on defense on our campus. To me, that's a success. Did we make a company? We didn't. Did I have hopes for that? No. That's a complicated problem.
So what about you, Rodrigo? So this is, I think, the way that you know, in terms of how you define what H4 is, you know, and I'm happy to give my thoughts here at the end, but I'd love to hear like, and again, you and I have talked a lot about these things, and these are topics that I think are so endemic as this program has grown, right? We're in multiple different countries now across some of the best universities in the world, and we've seen how this grows. But for you, what makes this and what makes an H4 class an H4 class in your experience?
Yeah, I love what David and Magda said. I'm gonna say what I think, and I think I might be saying the same thing that they're saying, just differently. What I've said to my students is, for me, what defines the process is the sticky note, and what I mean by that is that this temporary nature of it compared to a business plan that you put in a glossy brochure and send to your stakeholders. The fact that we work and we encourage students to go and work in this temporary support, which is a canvas with sticky notes or a PDF that can be deleted, that we encourage them to go and revise and pivot, right? So, and change. It means that we are pushing the idea that there is a different way to approach problem definition, which is get in contact with your beneficiary, get close contact with them, interact with them, and learn from them, right? And it's this process of co-creation. So what I would say, if I would be an evaluator doing quality control of a hacking for program, I didn't see a process of co-creation between the team and the beneficiary. I would say this is not a hacking for program, right? So the typical waterfall programs that a lot of government agencies do when they set up the requirements and 7 months later you see the first version of the fully blown product. That is not for me a hacking for program, right? So it's kind of what you were saying, guys. So I think we're more or less in the same wave frequency. But yeah, this idea of co-creation that often translates into a pivot or 2 or 3 in the process as you learn things. Theoretically speaking, you might have a good project without a pivot if you just hit the jackpot and define the problem at the beginning in the right way. I haven't seen one yet, so I think that 1 or 2 pivots are a good example of the co-creation process. And ultimately, what I'd love to see is that if you did it right, the customer, the beneficiary, feels that they were part of the creation process, so they are invested in it. Instead of feeling that this is given to them by the design, and they actually feel that they collaborated. They can see that they decided that that button was going to be there, and it was going to be this size, and we're going to be deploying it with this concept of operations in this way. So I would say that to Magda's and David's point, yeah, this idea of a problem definition that it's healthy and it's interactive. That's for me what defines the lean and the hacking for experience.
Yeah, and if I could just add one point to that too.
Please.
Maybe think about it as, when we first start the class, fresh class, new semester, new students, we give them this big canvas, right? This mission model canvas. 9 areas on there, and it can look really confusing, and maybe part of that is because we start at the right, not the left. It's just counterintuitive for us, but no.
A little bit.
A little bit.
We might need to flip it. That's not a bad point.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I really hone into the class is to say, don't worry about most of this canvas, because you're going to spend probably 90% of your class time and your time away working on this project, figuring out the beneficiary discovery process, right, which is going to be that top right quadrant, that VPC value proposition. This is the most integral part of what you're going to work with, what you're going to learn, what you're going to use, and this is going to help you to develop that innovation. And all of the rest of the stuff that we see on the left side here, we'll worry about that at the end. But really, you just can't. You can't reduce the importance of what that top right quadrant means to the entire process.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, it was so this week we finally got out of like that triangle of success, as I call it, the value proposition, beneficiary, and mission achievement part. So the students finally got out of that. And the reason, to your point, David, why we spend so much time in there is that if you get those parts, the 80% there, because it's good enough, right? That's the one thing we teach, right? It'll never be perfect. There's no such thing probably. But is if you can get those pieces right, I agree with you. Everything else kind of follows suit, and that comes through the robust application of something like the value proposition canvas, getting out of the classroom, being able for the students to go through and have very robust discovery. And then I think the other piece about this, and I know we're talking about discovery, but the other piece about this is the faculty members being present in the classroom and providing that feedback. Early on in the semester, I see a lot of titles. And I ask, have you talked to 10 people with that title to develop an archetype? Well, no. Have you talked to anybody with that title? Well, no. It's like, well, why are they on your canvas? And you get some looks. I'm like, well, I want to see a name up there next week. I want to see what you're doing here and being able to build that out and get the students to understand that, I think it was, Bernie was saying before, was that very rarely you're going to talk to one person who's going to change the entire trajectory. They might put the seeds there, but you have to really go through and talk to a lot of different people that fit within that archetype. And it's an important piece to being able to to deliver that value they're looking for. So, that to me is one of to what you all are saying is so critically important to the student success factors, and really understand what the problem domain is. And I think that's part of this, what makes a class impactful is defining that domain because of the discovery. And it's not because the government's not capable. I just think sometimes that your people exist and organizations exist in their silos so infinitely that they're unable to see the forest for the trees. And well, I talk to people in industry and I talk to somebody in this adjacent organization, or did you know that this school that you have in the Army is doing this research and being able to tie these things together? Do you know this technology exists? And all of a sudden you can start seeing light bulbs. And there's this level of insight that these tools and getting out of the classroom, and only via getting out of the classroom can these students really be able to pick up on those things. It's just, that's the learning mechanism. And one other piece I'll add real quick is it's something that one of the things I love about this program is, and probably all of you experience this, is I have students that graduated many years ago that come in, they say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I had a student come in this week for my Hacking for Diplomacy class to talk to the students about what he experienced. And he said, here's the neat thing. And he was a federal employee now. And he said, the thing that you're doing in a semester, they're going to ask you to do in 2 weeks or in a month when you go start working. And you've got this leg up on everybody else coming in the industry that has no familiarity with this platform. Even if you're not calling it lean or you're not whatever, you being able to define this space and being able to have ideas and become critical thinkers is so inherently important to success, whether you start your own company or you're going in as an entrepreneur, you're going into federal study, putting a uniform on, whatever. And I think for the student peers to hear him say that was they help get it, because it's just like anything else. Your professor tells you something and it's but when somebody that you know is telling you this, that also highlights this process can work when applied robustly.
And one thing on that point too is that it's always awesome to hear about those success stories, right? To say, I mean, this is what we talked about with the capstone process as well, is that we're trying to get you to have a leg up against your rivals, those that you're competing against when you go out in the workforce and do these kinds of things. And so, something like lean methodology that we're doing here absolutely applies, very well to a federal job, but it also applies to any kind of project or problem that you're going to work on in the future, including if you haven't done a capstone project yet. You can take this and apply it to that to do, better learning. You'll learn more about the problem, you learn more about the people you're working with. I see a lot of times where capstones can be stuck with just working with a sponsor and nobody else, right? And there's a lot of other people that are involved with this, right? But they'll take it at face value and they'll just say this is the problem because this is what they gave to us. We're going to run with it. But I think the point I was trying to make is, dual use is a real thing in this course. It has applicability in the private and public sector.
Absolutely. So with we have about 15 minutes left here, and I know everyone's got class or got things that they've got going on. What I'd like to do is finish this up and go around our virtual studio here and talk about what could be best practices. If you have a student or faculty member who's new into the environment that's coming in and saying, I'm unsure on what best practices I can get with beneficiary discovery. If you can give somebody that elevator pitch about, here's how I think I can set you up for success with some quick feedback, what might that look like? So Rodrigo, if you don't mind me picking on you first with this, what would be the couple of things that you'd say, hey, do this or read this and run with this? We'll go from there and we can close up the session.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll reiterate because we had a lot of smart people today in the podcast. I'll reiterate a lot of things that had been said already. But many of these things that we are teaching, or we should be teaching, and that's my point, are executive skills, right? What we now call executive skills, and they require some academic foundations. But this is an experiential learning for people who want to learn about how to do things by doing them. Uh, and what I would say that I often see, and not only in hacking for problems, but in general in programs that require some element of executive skills, is that we normally suck at teaching them. Right. So I was very happy to hear that that's not the case here, and but that there are a lot of things that will be determinant to the success or failure of our students, and that we either as faculty take them for granted or we don't do enough to go at the level that needs to be done, especially for undergrad, but this is true even for the graduate education. So the one thing that I would say is remember that we're asking students to do something that is very different to what they would do in a normal class. We're not asking them to write code or write an essay. We're asking them to interact with the world, and that requires certain levels of support that faculty will almost need to be a mentor in the way that you would expect when you get to your first job and somebody would be showing you where the coffee shop is and how to get photocopies, right? So there are things that it's very easy to be as faculty members who are in a certain point in their career cursed by the curse of knowledge, to forget how it feels not to know how to do this the first time, and then to be very harsh as an evaluator and a judge because they failed to do what we actually never taught them how to do first. So I would say go remedial. And it's not remedial, it's help them succeed in this new world. This implies learning how the Pentagon works. If it's a hacking for defense, implies to help them, guide them through the intricacies of the Department of State. If it's hacking for diplomacy, right? I remember my day job is at the Naval Postgraduate School, and I remember that we had one of the first intro classes, so the NPS, like many other military universities. Most of the faculty is civilian, most of the student is military. So I remember one presentation when we had somebody say, okay, Mr. Such and Dr. Such and Such, let me introduce you Lieutenant Such and Such. And they gave us a whole introduction of what the life of a military officer is, and then the opposite. Hey, Lieutenant such and such, let me introduce you to Doctor such and such, and they talked about all of the pressure points and what it's a tenure track, etc. So we could all understand our different worlds and make something out of it. I think that that's kind of a role that we have with our students, right? So we are sending them to interact with people they have no experience before in many cases, be that either developers or members of the sponsors of the problem for hacking for defense. So giving them those tools to survive, I think, would be super important.
No, absolutely. So Magda, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Like, what would be you get that 5 minutes with a faculty member that you're spending with them as you're walking to what would you recommend to help prepare them and their students for that out of classroom experiential aspect of this program?
I think Rodrigo covered many of those. I would say one, I consider this to be an essential component of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. I definitely do. If you are interested to teach the class takes effort. But it is the most rewarding class that I have ever taught. And I taught strength of materials and I taught design elements. I find this the most rewarding because they depend on the sponsor, they depend on the interest of the student, they depend on the faculty, and that group there generates the energy and the outcome of the project. I find it very rewarding. I really think that this is not a course for one time. So you don't teach this course, even though there are materials. This is only for faculty who believe that I'm interested in this. And I said this before, we need to prepare our students to solve ill-defined problems.
Absolutely.
And this is the best example that I know that is given to us, that it's very ill-defined. We don't know what it is. We want you to define it. So the experience for the students and the skill they're getting definitely put them in a good position to go and make a huge impact starting at the first job. And for us, this is an elective course. So when I talk to companies, I say, these are the students who choose to do this. Most of it doesn't count for their major. They may count for a certificate, but they want to be part of it because they see the value of the skills. So I wish we had more. I really would like to see more of our students. And I said this at the last conference last week, College Industry Partnerships Conference. We talked about hacking for defense. And the one point that because somebody asked me, how much money are they paying? I said, no, there isn't any money involved. If you're going for the money, this is the wrong program to go to. You're going to this because you really believe that it brings to your campus an additional element. The way I see it, our students have their own ideas to pursue for entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. They can work with faculty who have their own ideas. But now you have a third option. You have those students who say, I don't have an idea myself to go after. I don't want to work with faculty research, but now I have another program that if I'm interested to invest time, I could make something out of it. So I see it as a very good component of our ecosystem.
Oh, that's tremendous. And David, your thoughts there? You got that elevator pitch to kind of prepare your students or faculty for that out of classroom experience.
We only have 5 minutes. The first thing that comes up to me is because I just find this to be such a challenge, and it seems to become a greater and greater challenge every year, is the soft skill aspect of students. And I don't want to slight anybody, but I want to say that I think that our digital lives have taken over much more than our physical lives, and they have this profound effect on the way that we communicate. And in a course like this, you have to be able to work with people, right? And so, one of the most important skills, life skills that you can have, and if you want to be successful in your careers, like Magda was saying, if you're concentrating on, wanting to make money or whatever that is, well, you better have really good soft skills, right? Yeah, and communication is probably one of the most integral ones. And so, as an advisor, you really have to really get the students on board with a good communication practice and style. I tell them that they want to have somebody that's officially part of that communication role that probably handles a lot of that, right? So the way that they're going to interact with each other, the way they're going to interact with, potential beneficiaries, their clients, subject matter experts, all these different types of things that you have to do that you kind of think about, this is fine. All we got to do is just shoot some emails or, we'll add them to our Slack channel and then everything will be great. But that's not really the real world. It's not the case. And, we have to get back to better sound practices of being able to follow up with people, right? That's one thing that gets lost in translation is that, hey, I feel like if I just shoot an email out, everything is good. And then, you say 3 days later, hey, how's that going with such and such? And they say, oh, we haven't heard back from them yet. Like, what did you do? You sent an email? That's it? How do you know that email even got to them? How do you know it didn't go to junk? You got to have a little bit more of an accountability perspective to that, better communication practices. Advisors, that's one of the big points that they really need to hone with their teams to say, hey, we are allowed to pick up a phone. We don't have to do a Zoom call. We don't have to schedule this 24 hours in advance. We can call somebody at any time. Don't be afraid to, rattle a few chains or whatever it might be, right? That you can, people like to be bugged. They like to know that you are on top of the game with the problem and the work that you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
So I think communication, that's a huge one. We could spend a whole topic on it.
And I think, and that will we could probably end up having another session on these. And I figure this will be the first of many of these sessions. And I'm grateful for the folks on the board. And Jeff, I'm not sure if you're able to hear, but hear us there if the communication's coming through. But as we're closing out this session, and Magda mentioned this, so Jeff is writing working on a manuscript for the Hacking for Defense model. And so Jeff, what we're closing this session out with, appreciate you jumping on here, is this idea of if you have 5 minutes with a new faculty member or some students who are interested in this program, which I know you do at Stanford, you have this opportunity to talk about this from a beneficiary discovery perspective. What are you telling them to kind of get ahead on so that they're prepared to be successful throughout the course of a quarter or a semester, or taking on these skills as they progress academically and professionally?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for hosting this, Jim. I'm sorry that I had a conflict also with CMP today. But is the first thing that I tell students, and forgive me if you've already gone over this, is they're always super bothered by the number of interviews that they have to do. And so they automatically just want to start firing off emails to someone, anyone, as quickly as possible. And, just telling them to take a step back and think about what they want to learn, because what they want to learn will dictate who they speak to, is probably the best advice that I could give to any student beginning the customer discovery journey. And that goes back to, really determining which hypotheses they want to test, and based on those hypotheses, who specifically can give useful insights to test those hypotheses. Otherwise, and I've seen this, and I'm sure everyone else on this call has seen it with their students, that just hope that doing a lot of interviews with just random people, insights will just fall from the sky, and just serendipitously happen, and it just doesn't work that way. And so just being intentional about what you want to learn, who you want to talk to, and the specific points that you want to gain insights from out of those interviews.
No, I think that's a great way. And Jeff, I know, thank you again for joining us as we close this out. But that's one of the things that I think I want to highlight as we close this, and it's probably going to be a conversation for the next one of these, that idea of hypothesis testing, is that there is a level of throwing things at the wall to see what sticks to an extent, but that's just kind of how you're building that all out. What questions are you asking? What are you trying to solve for that week? What's your MVP pivoting towards, or you're building towards, in order to see what questions you want to ask and where are you going? And I think this idea of hypothesis testing, and again, seeing having very targeted application. Now, that being said, targeted within the domain. So it's not to say that, well, the problem we are given is a cybersecurity problem, we're only going to talk to cybersecurity engineers. And I know, Jeff, that's not what you're saying, but you're saying, I'm probably not going to go talk to somebody who isn't somewhat related into that ecosystem, whether it's somebody who's using these platforms, or who's developing the code, or somebody who's running the reports, or somebody at that situational awareness level in a leadership position, whatever it may look like. And one of the ideas I brought up earlier, Jeff, is this idea of that mission achievement canvas, of using that the place where those individuals exist, and using that as a targeting mechanism to find people within that ecosystem. So who haven't we talked to? What are we missing? What do we get wrong? And what do we test? What do we validate or invalidate as we go along the way? And that takes work. And, I think this is where one of the points that we're going to continue to make and build this out is, students are nervous about seeing these interview numbers, but the value in getting out of the classroom cannot be underscored. And this is one of the tools that we have as faculty to help them and push them towards doing that. And I see Jeff, he's smiling there. And I think we're very much on the same page in terms of that line of thinking. So that being said, I want to thank all of you for joining us. My panelists here from the Common Mission Project Academic Advisory Board. Thank Common Mission Project for their support of all of this.
And
Rodrigo,
thank you for being part of our MVP, right? So
yeah.
we've been scaling this up. We started with the podcast, and now we have our first live stream of the Common Mission podcast. So hopefully you will be able to join us multiple times. And we say the same to the audience, both those watching live, but also the ones that will be watching us on repeat. Please let us know what you think, what you want to know, and what should be part of the content as we push forward. Also, if there's somebody you think we should be interviewing and you would love to hear us talk to that person, please let us know.
Yeah, or topics as well. So with this, I mean, we've got some of the, I'm not saying this the most, you're my friends, but some of the best and brightest that we get to work with in this ecosystem. So having people that are on this call of the stature and experience that they are is incredibly gratifying, A, for me, but B, for everybody listening. It's very rare when you get to have thought leaders from various parts of the academy come together and be able to do this and share their experiences. And I know, just as an aside, Jeff was one of the people who trained me in this program. He helped come through it and give me feedback and insight. My training period at Texas A&M is where I did my training. So this community, that's where I did my session. So this community that's here is very inclusive, and it's very open, and we're learning from one another. And we want to do that with the folks who are listening. Whether you're an educator, you're a student, what do you want to see from this? What can we help you with? This is what the drive of all of this is, to make us all better. So I want to thank all of my advisory board. Thank you sincerely, everybody who's listening, everybody who's catching it live or on the recording. Leave some information. We'll have some contact information about the folks that are on here with our academic advisory board, how you can get in touch with them via their LinkedIn, as well as the contact information for myself and Rodrigo at the Common Mission Project. But just as my sign off, as we will always do, thank you again to the Common Mission Project for the support of this live stream. The Common Mission Project has demonstrated that students can tackle some of the toughest government problems, and in doing so, create vibrant and diverse ecosystems where government, academia, and industry build partnerships around problems, prototypes, and solutions to urgent challenges facing our nation. Thank you to all of you for participating. We'll see you at the next one. Thanks, everyone.